so this morning we are looking at the practice of fasting. And I want to break it down into the what, the why, and the how of fasting. Hopefully there'll be something in there that helps us just to see this, because this may be new information for us. You may have engaged with fasting before, but hopefully there might be something in here that just helps us understand a bit more about this practice. So the what, I'm not going to take too long because it's kind of basic. At its most basic, fasting is going without food. It's abstaining from food for a set period of time. And it's different in terms of, as we think, obviously, Lent is around the corner. Lent is coming up in a few weeks' time. It's that time when we remember Jesus' fast for 40 days and 40 nights. And often we might say, well, I'm fasting from alcohol, or I'm fasting from TV, or fasting from social media. Technically, those things, they're an abstinence. They're not fasting. Fasting, if we use the language in that sense, is just to do with food. So those things would be abstaining from TV or alcohol or chocolate or whatever it might be, social media. Fasting is specifically about food. Still includes drinking water. Sometimes there's like special occasions where you might do without food and water, but they're like usually very special occasions because we've got to be careful as well that if we go without food and water for too long a period of time, we can hurt our bodies eventually. So that's the what. Pretty simple, is it's going without food for a set period of time, still drinking water. The why, it's a little bit more complicated. And through practicing the way, they offer 4 helpful reasons for why we might fast. And what I thought I would do is I would just break those down fairly shortly this morning for us to give us a little bit more information. So the first reason for why we might fast is to offer ourselves to God. Now this is maybe the first, most central reason to why we might fast, and maybe requires the least explaining out of the lot of them. In simple terms, it's helping us to offer our bodies as well as our minds and our hearts and everything that we are to God. Because you see, you don't just have a body. Obviously, you're a person, you have a body, but you are a body. Not just I have a body, you are a body. Say that to the person who's next to you. You are a body. And American Baptist theologian John Piper describes it as this. He says, fasting, I didn't put it up there, never mind. He says, fasting is whole body hungering for God. It's a way of saying, God, I want you more than I want food. And I'm saying that not just with my mouth, but with my stomach, with all of my being. Like the psalmist says, I wait for the Lord, my whole being waits. It's not just a thing it's not just my mouth, my mind, my heart, my whole being, my whole body hungering for God. As Paul writes in Romans 12, therefore I urge you, brothers and sisters, in view of God's mercy, to offer your bodies as a living sacrifice, holy and pleasing to God. This is your true and proper worship. We are whole body beings. And through the practice of fasting, going without food for a set period of time, we're offering ourselves to God with our bodies as well as with our mouths or our minds or our hearts, whole body involvement in our worship to God. That's the first thing. The second thing is to grow in holiness. Do you know the human body is amazing? And Chloe hinted towards this a little bit in her interview, that there's quite a lot of science around physical benefits to fasting. I'm not a scientist. I don't claim to be a scientist. I'm pretty much just copying facts here. But these are some amazing bonuses, physical benefits to fasting. As a result of our body's internal processes, there are all sorts of health benefits to fasting. It can cleanse your body of toxins, increase your metabolism, reduce your weight. It can lower insulin levels, inflammation and blood pressure, strengthen your immune system, reduce your heart rate, slow aging, yes please, and protect against and possibly reverse many diseases such as diabetes, cardiovascular disease, and a range of neurological disorders, including Alzheimer's. There's a whole host of physical benefits there to fasting. Now, maybe for some of us, it's like slow down aging. I'll take that. Yeah. Or help me reduce my weight, feel more physically healthy. That's great. But they shouldn't be our primary reason for fasting. As followers of Jesus, our ultimate aim is a more of a spiritual one. But I don't want to say we push aside those physical benefits because we just want spiritual benefits. The joy of it is that it's a both and. By fasting, we get both together. Listen to this from Pope Benedict the 16th. In our own day, fasting seems to have lost something of its spiritual meaning and has taken on, in a culture characterized by the search for material well-being, a therapeutic value for the care of one's body. Fasting certainly brings benefits to physical well-being. We're not denying that. But for believers, it is, in the first place, a therapy to heal all that prevents us from conformity to the will of God. So our primary aim is on spiritual benefits, but we also acknowledge there is great physical benefits too. But our main primary aim is we want to grow in holiness. We want to offer our bodies to God. Spiritual purposes. It helps us, again, like I said, break the hold that our desires have on us and helps us instead to think with more clarity, to align our desires with that of God, saying, God, what do you want for me? God, I hunger after you more than I'm hungering for food right now. Listen to this from Paul in Romans, back a few pages, Romans chapter 7. I really identify with this. I don't know if you do, but he says this. It's a bit of a tongue twister. I do not understand what I do, for what I want to do, I do not do, but what I hate, I do. For I know that good itself does not dwell in me, that is in my sinful nature. For I have the desire to do what is good, but I cannot carry it out. I really identify with this from Paul because I really want to fast. I really want to spend more time in prayer, but I also love donuts. I also have, my stomach growls at me when I skip a meal. I'm a weak human being, and when I see sweet treats, I just can't help myself. I'm addicted to sugar. I'm addicted to coffee. So to deny myself those things is really tricky. But fasting offers us a solution to this. If you're anything like me, it offers us a solution. Richard Foster, again in his book, he says that fasting reveals the things that control us. It's going to bring to life those things that are controlling us. So often in our lives, we push down things by eating. We comfort eat. So we don't let ourselves feel hungry because maybe that hunger also stirs up in us. It reminds us about an anger that we've got. We're angry about something and we push that down. Or we're feeling really sad or potentially depressed by something. We're struggling with anxiety, so we comfort eat and we push those things further down. But we're not allowing ourselves to process them healthily. But what fasting does is it lifts the lid on all of that. And all those things are going to rise to the surface because your body is screaming at you, I want food. And every time our stomach rumbles, it's another reminder of maybe when you fast, especially for me, probably still happens, but especially early on, I don't just get hungry, I get hangry. Anybody else, if you're like me in that, you're going to find that anger is rising to the surface of you. You get irritated that little bit quicker. But what that's doing is the fasting is revealing in me, I've got something I need to work on there. I'm maybe a more irritated person. I get irritated easily. I need to bring that to God and ask God to help me process that in the love of the Father. So it brings to the surface all of those things that we've pressed down, our sadness, our anxiety, our anger, all those things that are controlling us. We don't have a mute button for them by feeding ourselves when we fast. And it's really hard. I'm not 2 years into this, I'm months into this. I still find it difficult. But I think to an extent that's part of the practice. If it was easy, we'd all do it. So there's something about it being difficult. But over time, there is, and as Chloe can attest in her story, there's healing to be found through it, allowing those things to come to the surface. There's a wholeness that we receive from God as we come to the practice of fasting. That's the second thing. Third thing, it helps us to amplify our prayers. Has anybody ever seen the film Dunkirk? Anybody ever watched it? Or maybe you know the story. I watched it this week. I've never seen the film. I've heard the story before, and I actually got to watch it this week. And there's a picture of what Dunkirk looked like. And I want to just tell you quickly this amazing story, because the people throughout history, they don't just call it Dunkirk, they call it the miracle of Dunkirk. And if you've heard this story before, then you may know where I'm going, but if you haven't, this is amazing. So it's in the Second World War, May 1940. The Nazis have overrun France, and around 338,000 Allied troops are in retreat and trapped on the beach at Dunkirk. There's no hope of rescue in time. The German forces are moving in and are very likely to just wipe them all out. 338,000 lives lost. The Prime Minister at the time, Winston Churchill, is gearing himself up for the annihilation of the British Army. But then a few crazy things happen. On Friday, the 24th of May, Hitler issues an order to his generals to stop their assault. Tons of German tanks 10 miles away from sweeping through and annihilating the British Army, Hitler just says stop. That's the first strange thing that happens. The second strange thing that happens is that the city is enveloped in this weird mixture of fog and smoke, meaning that the German aircrafts and bombers cannot simply just fly over and drop bombs on them because they're grounded. They can't take off. So that's the second thing that happens. Again, troops trapped on the beach, you could easily just sweep through and drop bombs on them. The third thing, even stranger, the English Channel, so the sea in between Britain and France, which is notorious, if you've ever sailed on it, it is notorious for being choppy and making your stomach go a little bit, it suddenly goes still and quiet. Historians describe the English Channel was like bathwater, which makes it possible for around 800 or so small civilian boats to cross the English Channel to rescue British troops trapped on the beach. But what the film doesn't tell us, and here's the real magical moment, what the film doesn't tell us is that on Friday, the 24th of May, King George VI at the time, upon hearing the news of this impending invasion and the annihilation of the British Army, calls the nation to a day of prayer and fasting. He says, wherever you are, up and down the country, find your local church and get on your knees and pray that these 338,000 lives would be saved. And throughout the country, up and down the country, tens of thousands of people lined up to get inside their church building. There was a queue, there's a photo of it, I didn't have it here, there's a queue of people lined up trying to get into Westminster Abbey so that they can come before God and pray that these lives would be saved. Just hours after the king called for this national day of prayer and fasting, Hitler gave that order to stop the tanks from advancing. The people in that generation, they don't just call it the story of Dunkirk, they call it the miracle of Dunkirk. Now, was that a miracle? Was it just a coincidence? Was it God's response to his people praying and fasting? Or was it just weird, poor planning by the German army? We don't know. That's the honest answer. But I do know, and I've seen in my own life, and throughout history we've seen throughout the church, that something powerful happens when you bring together prayer and fasting. John Mark Comer says it like this, and I think it's beautiful. He says, you can pray without fasting, and you can fast without praying. But when you combine the two, it's like there's a chemical reaction that amplifies the power of prayer. I love it. It's like a chemical reaction. I think of like an explosion. Have you ever done a science experiment where you drop that little bit of, like, you ever cleaned out your kettle with like bicarbonate of soda or put those stuff in it, like that? I think of that. It's this chemical reaction that happens when we fast and pray about a situation. It collides and it's beautiful. And prayer is basically in two things. It's both speaking to God and hearing from God at its simplest. And fasting helps us to amplify both of those. It helps us to hear from God with greater discernment. Psalm 143, the psalmist says, let the morning bring me word of your unfailing love. For I have put my trust in you. Show me the way I should go, for to you I entrust my life. Fasting helps us to have greater clarity and discernment, to hear better from God. And I strongly encourage you, if you're ever facing a big decision, use it as an opportunity to pause and pray and fast and say, God, give me direction. Give me discernment. I want, what is your will for me, God? It's an act of us surrendering and saying, moving from a place of I'm in control of my own life to God, you are in control. And I give up that control. So It amplifies our hearing from God, but also amplifies our speaking to God as well. Now, I need to put a reminder out here that God hears our prayers whether we fast or not. Please do not hear me that, if you don't fast and pray at the same time, God's not listening to you. That's not true. But there is something powerful that happens when we fast and pray together. It seems to change how we hear from God, but also how we ask God. Suddenly our prayers that we're asking maybe are less about ourselves and less about other situations. And again, it's involving our bodies, and we're saying, God, I care more about you breaking out in our world, in this person's life, in this situation, than I do about food. Jeremiah 29, in there, Jeremiah, he says, you will seek me and find me when you seek me with all your heart. And I think that's what happens when we fast and pray together. We change how we're asking. We're not just praying prayers to God with our words, but we're praying prayers to God with all of our body, seeking with all of our heart. We're saying, God, I care more about this than I do about food.